Well, good evening. I'm glad that you are here if you're here in person, and glad that you are joining us online if you're watching via the live stream, or if you watch this during the week when you were off and available. We are in week 17 on our Wednesday night series, our series on Eschatology, the study of the last things. And so we are in part 2. We are in part 2 of the Olivet Discourse. And so we've run through a lot of topics on this. We've discussed every single view, or at least every single major view. And so we are on the Olivet Discourse, had a lot of questions about it. And so we are going to tackle one of those views tonight. We will review a little bit, and then we will tackle the view of the preterist view in regards to the Olivet Discourse. And so the Olivet Discourse, as we discussed last week, occurs, this conversation, or really kind of a Q&A with two specific questions from the disciples to Jesus, and then Jesus is going to answer that primarily in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. All of these, I believe, are really kind of parallel passages just in different Gospels. Some people argue that about whether it's all the same, but I do think that the general flow of each one pertains to the question that the disciples give that asked Jesus in each Gospel respectively. So the different views that we have had, or that we will discuss, tonight will be the preterist view, so we will discuss this one tonight specifically. And so we have the preterist view, which is, as we discussed last week, a reference to the Olivet Discourse, at least partially, part of it, being already having occurred. So at the time that Jesus spoke the Olivet Discourse, none of the things that he spoke had yet come to pass in that moment in history, but some of those things would come to pass specifically in 70 A.D. In the first section of the Olivet Discourse. This is, well, really, I say preterist. It's really more of a partial preterist. It's not really a full preterist. There are some groups out there that do see all of it as already having occurred, which I think is just not a very fair way or good hermeneutic way to interpret the text there. So the preterist view is stating that part or most of what Jesus discussed in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21 has already occurred before us, yet the rest of the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24 is still yet to come. So they almost say some of it already happened, some of it is yet not to happen. The futurist view really sees almost all of the Olivet Discourse as a future event that is yet to come in the future. And maybe a little bit tail off of AD 70. They say, yeah, you can maybe make that argument, but most everything is future events. Then we have the historicist view, which says that most of Matthew 24 is kind of fulfilled throughout church history. And that would be from the first century all the way to, or after Jesus resurrected, the Spirit of God is poured out at Pentecost, all the way to the return of Christ. So it just kind of happens throughout history. All these events kind of occur, if that makes sense. And then the idealist view, or the symbolic view, states that there is this reoccurring pattern that is taking place over history of judgment, persecution, and deliverance, along with wars, rumors of wars. And that stuff just kind of keeps on cycling, and it will cycle all the way to the Antichrist and then the ultimate return of Jesus. And so all of these views, I do believe you could kind of take a stance on all these views and probably make an argument for each one. There again, last week, I think I kind of at least hinted a little bit at where I would lean toward as far as the text goes. So what we will do tonight is we are going to look at Matthew 24. So if you have your Bibles or your papers, if you're in here, you'll have a paper with Matthew chapter 24. We will reference the other ones. We will reference Mark 13 and maybe Luke 21 a little bit. But the fullest picture of the Olivet Discourse and what Jesus is doing as far as explaining it, the majority of the bulk is found in Matthew's Gospel, in Matthew chapter 24, primarily. So we discussed last week in Matthew 23, 29 through 39, which we will read in just a second, that Jesus is at the temple, he's in Jerusalem, and he is giving in Matthew 23, he is giving these 7 woes to the scribes and the Pharisees and the religious leaders. He's given all of these woes. And you will kind of see that if you go back and read Matthew 23, which we read 2 parts last week, but you will just kind of see, and I'm going to just kind of flip there right now in my Bible, but you will just see this kind of constant in the text. In verse 13, woe to you. Verse 16, woe to you. Verse 23, woe to you. Verse 25, woe to you. Verse 27, woe to you. Verse 28, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. This idea of judgment, this idea of a judgment and kind of directly declaring his criticism to the religious leaders that should know what the truth is and not lord stuff over people. So Jesus kind of comes in with a little bit of a disciplinary rod, if you will, in the 7 woes. Now, I thought it was important to talk about the 7 woes before we get to Matthew 24, which is going to be the bulk of what we have been discussing. But context is very important. So we're going to read the last section. So we'll read the last woe in the last little section of Matthew 23, 29 through 39. So here we go. We will read that, make a few observations, then we'll jump into the Olivet Discourse and then talk specifically about the preterist view and how people that land there get there. So here we go. Verse 29, Matthew 23. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you build the tombs of the prophets and decorate the monuments of the righteous, saying, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. Thus you witness against yourselves that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets. So Jesus is making a point here to the scribes and the Pharisees. He says, you come in, you decorate the monuments. There were monuments around Jerusalem that were set up to prophets, almost kind of to acknowledge who they were. And the prophets would like to go, oh, yes, or not the prophets, but the scribes and the Pharisees would go, well, yes, we would agree with Elijah. And yes, we would agree with Jeremiah and Isaiah and Hosea. Yes, we would agree with them. But what happened is some of those prophets were killed by the Israelites who did not want to hear what they had to say. And so the Pharisees go, well, no, we love the prophets. Our fathers, they killed them. We wouldn't have joined in with them. And literally, Jesus, who is the Word made flesh, so everything the prophets are saying is coming directly from who? The Lord. And so when Jesus gets there, he goes, really? Because you speak against me? You speak against me and my followers, and yet we are just in step with the prophets, but you say that you are in agreement with them. So it's almost like you just say what you need to say at the right time for everything to kind of work out, and people still kind of look to you as this leader. Thus, because you're saying our fathers did that, thus you witness against yourselves that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets, saying your ancestors did this. Fill up then the measure of your fathers, you serpents, you brood of vipers. How are you to escape being sentenced to hell? Y'all, that's very graphic language. I mean, that's as explicit as you can get by saying, you are not a part of my kingdom. You do not love the Lord your God. You love to try to keep commands so that others can look at you and adorn you. Now, I want to make one note here. This is kind of a freebie for tonight. This is a little bit off the mark of eschatology stuff, but I just want to say this, and I'm guilty of this. There were times in college, and even as a young believer, fresh out of school, that I would mistake legalism for somebody desiring to live righteous and holy. So people would say, I don't want to do something. I feel convicted about going there. I feel convicted about watching this. I don't want to listen to that. I think we shouldn't do this. And I would be like, what in the world, man? Well, don't we have grace? Like, why are you acting so uptight about a specific thing? And I mistook what they were trying to walk in faithful obedience to the Lord, not because they thought they could earn God's favor, but because they had God's favor. That's totally separate, right? If you say, I'm not doing X, Y, and Z because I don't think that's okay, and I'm going to stay over here away from that, that is probably not somebody thinking, I'm earning my way to heaven by not doing that. That's them saying, I'm guarding my heart, I'm having discernment, I don't want to sin. So I just want to label the two. The Pharisees are doing stuff so that other people see to earn God's favor. That is not a genuine relationship with Yahweh. That is you saying, I think I can earn that. If you serve at the church and you think that by serving and plugging in and doing and helping, all of these things, if you think that's going to earn God's favor, then you have missed the mark and that is not the gospel. But because of the gospel, you want to serve. You want to do well, which is what you see the disciples doing after the Spirit is poured out at Pentecost. They are doing faithful things because God has been faithful. It's almost like it's a product of salvation, not a means to try to get to it. So that's important. So the Pharisees are on the other end. They are doing it so that God sees them, so that people notice them. So here we go. Therefore I send you the prophets and wise men and scribes, some of whom you will kill and crucify. So it's interesting. So now he's not talking about historical stuff. He's talking about stuff that is going to happen. Primarily his disciples, the apostles. And some of you will flog in your synagogues and persecute from town to town, saying, you say you're not like your forefathers because you went to kill the prophets, but ironically what you don't understand is that you soon will want to kill these people. Now, I do not believe necessarily, of course we have no context for this, it does not say that the Apostle Paul is anywhere near this conversation, but is he not a Pharisee who will be doing exactly that before his conversion? So Paul's just one mention in that. So that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the sanctuary and the altar. Truly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. So he's talking about something that will occur in their lifetime. Now, you could say, well, what is a generation? I don't know, 30 years, 40 years, right? 50 years, like in this time frame, this will happen. So if a lot of them are in their 30s, right, to be a rabbi, 30 years old was kind of the mark for that. So between 30, 40, 50 years old in that area, in your lifetime, this stuff will come to take place. And it does. Obviously, we see that. So then, after he says that, it's almost as if he's talking to them, and then he almost turns to almost speak to the entire city. Maybe even this says, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, but maybe it's even more to all of Israel. He says, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing? See, your house, Old Testament reference to the temple, kind of like referencing this, you were given instruction. You were given to be caretakers of this. Your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So Jesus is saying, if you will not say that, if you will not say that faithfully, to repent and believe in who I am, you will not see me again. You will be cut off. So this is a lament of judgment, a lament of warning. And let's say that Jesus, we're not there. He's talking to them, and then he just kind of says this, like to all in general of all the people in the city. And so as we saw, Psalm 118 is the reference here, 118:26 is the reference here. And also, too, Matthew 21, or Matthew 23, Matthew 21, you will see in the triumphal entry where that phrase in Psalm 118:26 is used. When they say Hosanna, when he comes in, shirts laid down, clothes laid down, tunics laid down, and palm branches. So they do say it. Now, they don't understand it fully, what they're saying. They're not quite sure because they're thinking messianic leader, political power, military leader. They're still thinking that way. And so Jesus is obviously, after the resurrection, is going to make that very clear as to like what his purpose and plan was. So we get to the Olivet Discourse. So after this text, we have the woes to the Pharisees, the lament over Israel, and then we enter into the Olivet Discourse. So here we go. We're going to read the Olivet Discourse, and then we'll go through the preterist view. I just want to read through it one more time so we're all on the same page. Matthew 24, starting in verse 1, says this: Jesus left the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. But he answered them, "You see all these, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." Now, we don't get the question here. Remember, in Mark's Gospel, Mark 13, we get the question. In Mark 13, 1 through 2, we will get the question to that. And I'm going to flip there right quick just so we can see the question that was asked. So Mark 13, verses 1 and 2 says this: "And as he came out of the temple, one of the disciples said to him, 'Look, teacher, what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings.'" So that was the question. Like they were admiring the temple. Jesus just said that your house is desolate, right? He just said that. And then the disciples come out as they're leaving. They're referencing that. And then as they make their way to the Mount of Olives, Jesus looks back and just kind of makes this like declarative answer. Or not even, Mark 13, look, teacher, it's not even so much a question, but a statement, if you will. I said question, but it's really a statement. Look, teacher, what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings, as if to say, how magnificent is the temple? Isn't that so wonderful, right? And so here we go. Verse 3, after Jesus says, there will not be a stone left upon another that will not be thrown down. Verse 3, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. So he said what he said at the temple, makes his way to the Mount of Olives, and then it's almost like they're pondering all of this stuff, right? They're pondering going, interesting. He said there won't be any stone left on another, but the temple is like the central focus of all of religious worship for the Jewish community. That's the central focal point of everything. And he said on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us then, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" So they asked two questions here. Tell us when these things will be. What will the things be? What did he just say would happen? The temple will be destroyed. There won't be any bricks left on top of another. So they're going, well, that's interesting. Now, he's been talking about leaving and then a return. So they know that that's there. And so they say, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? So they kind of have this two-part question. And Jesus answered them, "See that no one leads you astray. For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of the birth pains. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come." Verse 15. "So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who is on the housetop not go down and take what is in his house, and let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And alas, for women who are pregnant and for those who are nursing infants in those days, pray that your flight may not be in winter or on a Sabbath, for then there will be great tribulation, such as not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. And if those days had not been cut short, no human being will be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Then if anyone says to you, 'Look, here is the Christ,' or 'There he is,' do not believe it. For false Christ and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand, so if they say to you, look, he is in the wilderness, do not go out. If they say, look, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on clouds of heaven with power and great glory, and he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call. They will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. From the fig tree, learn its lesson. As soon as its branches become tender and puts out its leaves, you must know that summer is near. So also, when you see all these things, you know that he is near at the very gates. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. So, we have this first section that is given to the disciples when they ask this question. And I believe it's in Luke's gospel that it references, who is actually there. Actually, no, I'm sorry, Mark's gospel, Mark 13, in that rendition, or that recording of the Olivet Discourse, it says that Peter and James and John and Andrew asked him privately. So those four disciples sat with Jesus. He's not just speaking to the massive crowd. Those four sit and ask this question that we see in Matthew 24. So all of that stuff has been said. And then at the very end, truly I say to you, verse 34, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. So then, verse 36, but concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. For as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day when Noah entered the ark, and they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. Then 2 men will be in the field, and one will be taken and one will left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and one left. Therefore stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have let his house be broken into. Therefore, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Who then is faithful and wise? Who then is the faithful and wise servant whom his master has set over his household to give them food at the proper time? Blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will set him over all his possessions. But if that wicked servant says to himself, my master is delayed, and begins to beat his fellow servant and eats and drinks with drunkards, the master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour he does not know, and he will cut him in pieces and put him with the hypocrites. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's a reference to hell that Jesus makes at the very end. So, we just read the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24, 1 through 51. So let's do this. We don't have time to kind of read through the rest of these, but on that other sheet you had, I didn't print this out. I was trying to save some paper. So I didn't print that out since a lot of you have that other sheet. But you can look over, you can flip in your Bible to Mark 13 and Luke 21 as well. So we have that thing. So let's talk about the views right quick of that text. Now, many of you, I would assume, have always heard Matthew 24, and just nod if you have, that Matthew 24, you have heard and read that text as what? Most all of that is a reference to what? The future coming of Jesus. Now that's, and I have too, and I even think y'all over the years, I have just simply quoted that as like, hey, you know this has to happen, you know when all these things happen, like to point to the signs of the coming of the end of the church age. But what's interesting is that as Jesus gives this dialogue here, it is interesting that if you just stop and read the text, I'm not talking about listen to someone like articulate a point, but if you just read the text, as we get down to verse 34, because Jesus is speaking to Peter, James, John, and Andrew, as we get to the end, even though the language sounds awfully end times-ishly, like, obviously it sounds that way, but when we get down to verse 34, he makes this statement to who? Those four sitting with him. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. The same thing he said in 23 at the end of the woes when he said, all of this will take place in this generation. Now, it's interesting to note this because this is kind of a huge deal for and we'll just call this partial preterism because there's no way, I don't think, to read verses 36 on to 51 and say that's not a future reference to the return of Christ. That seems explicit to me. But the preterist view would state that these things, because they're spoken to those people at that time in this generation, that all the language that is used prior to verse 36, so 24, so 1, I lost my spot, sorry. So verse 1 through 35 is a reference to what will take place at the time of the disciples, before they die. So the apostles will experience all of the things that Jesus is referencing in the first 35 verses because of the context of the conversation. So the main idea, and we'll flip to that. So the main idea is most or all of the Olivet Discourse, and I think we can just say most up to chapter 35 is where most people aren't going to argue 36 on. But up to 35, that those events surrounding the destruction of the temple, or those events are all based around the destruction of the temple in AD 70. The prophecies that Jesus laid out had already occurred, and they are not future events for us to anticipate or expect. That's the argument for this view. I'm not saying I fully agree with that. I'm just saying that's the argument that the people are making, saying, well, I was trying to think, well, why is that such a monumental deal for them? And a lot of it has to do with the fact that they would not read or understand texts like this to mean apocalyptic things that are going to happen sometime in the future that we need to kind of be looking in the sky waiting for. Sun darkened, stars falling, all this crazy stuff, blood moons, blah, 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 all this kind of crazy stuff happening. Rather, they would say, if you read verse 36 to 51, it seems like what? Somebody's working, somebody's there, somebody's not. It's not saying there's some cataclysmic war and things are exploding. It's like, hey, you be faithful, Jesus comes like a thief in the night. Trumpet sounds, here he comes. Right? As opposed to the idea of reading eschatology or end time stuff through the lens of wars overseas in Iran or Russia, and then we're just kind of like, what's going to happen? Everything's exploding, but rather those things will just happen because of a sinful world, and the Lord will return at His timing, whenever that is. So, and I think that the preterist view kind of pushes back from the futurist view, because the person who is a full futurist person looking at it, every earthquake, every tornado, there's a wildfire right now raging in South Georgia that has destroyed 16,000 acres and 50-something homes right now. Stephanie has family, friends and stuff that have had to evacuate the area from the school because they're having to get as far away as they can. So it's like, there's a fire, there's this flood, there's a tsunami, and everything becomes just like, well, the Lord's coming back, the Lord's coming back. As opposed to, well, the faithful teaching of the New Testament is you remain faithful in suffering and trials, head to the plow, stop looking up and start looking out, which is really cool, because we will talk this Sunday. If you weren't planning on coming, if you listen online, be here Sunday, 10 a.m. We will talk about the ascension of Jesus. And notice, after Jesus ascends, all the disciples are doing what? And then you have the angelic beings that were like, hey, stop looking up. He's going to come back the same way he left. And basically get to the business and stop worrying about is every sign or every moment or every number that pops up somewhere on television. Oh, is that it? Is that it? Is that the Antichrist? You know what I mean? I'm not saying that we shouldn't be diligent and mindful. I'm just saying it seems like there are people that this is their whole world. Their entire Christian world is wrapped in, can they crack the code of the events in the world? And I would say, no, you can't. So stop doing that. So that's the main idea. So the Jewish-Roman War takes place from 66 AD to around 73, 74. It kind of depends on when you say that it ended. So it takes place in that framework. And so you have the Roman forces who were led by General Titus of the Roman army, and they besieged and ravaged the city of Jerusalem, and they burnt the second temple and systematically took down the temple brick by brick as to level it, which is the same thing that Jesus said, right, in the beginning of 24, there won't be a stone left here. Because what are they looking at? What are they pointing to? Look how beautiful the temple is. He's saying, that's fine that you think that. There's something greater coming. And you marvel at this temple, which has become a den of thieves. Jesus has already flipped over tables and ran all of the money makers out. And he has referenced and he has pointed back to the Old Testament that you didn't obey the prophets, and now I'm the full fulfillment of this. Basically, there will be no need for any temple because you will be the temple of the Holy Spirit. Like he's trying to articulate this, and he's saying all this will be done. So in AD 70, and that's when the temple is destroyed. So the war goes on for a little while, but then when they besiege Rome, when the Roman army besieges Jerusalem, Jerusalem sits elevated. On every side, like you know what Jesus would say, and he went up to Jerusalem. You'll see that in the text sometimes. He went up or they went up. Well, sometimes geographically, they may be coming from Samaria, which on a map is north. And Jerusalem is south, but they would say they went up to Jerusalem because they went up in elevation. So it was, I mean, I've never been to Jerusalem, but just looking at drone footage and stuff, if you were an army, I mean, now it would be easy with missiles and stuff to like shoot it or like to come at it. But prior to that, it was a hard city to take because it was surrounded with a wall and you had to come up the mountain to besiege it. Like it was not an easy task. It wasn't like it was down in a valley and you could just come in and like pummel it. So in AD 70, after the war's been going on several years, Jerusalem gets overtaken by the Roman army, and we have months of starvation and fighting. The Romans basically just surrounded the city and cut them off from supplies. So just hungry, food, fuel, water, all that stuff is cut off. They can't get any more stuff into the city. And so the Roman victory results in massive casualties, enslavement of the population, and the destruction of the temple, which was at the very center of all the religious life in Jerusalem. And so let's just talk about this. I put a couple bullet points in your notes. You'll see this. If you don't see that, I'll just run through them if you're watching us. So we have the siege, which is the Roman general Titus encircled Jerusalem with 4 legions of soldiers. 48,000 plus soldiers encircled Jerusalem, and they end up taking it. So that started in April of 70 AD. They trapped thousands of pilgrims because they were there. And Josephus records this, an extra-biblical historian, records this, that you had many pilgrims that had come in for the Passover. So they had all kind of come here to the temple for the Passover, and they were trapped. Many starved, many died, couldn't get food. And so the Jewish forces, just as I've kind of read throughout some historical documents, the Jewish forces within the city were divided among themselves, fighting each other. They're dealing with this dwindling food, water, which ultimately weakened their defenses. Soldiers didn't want to stand post. And so eventually they come in, and then in August or September of 70 AD, the second temple was set on fire, burned to the ground, and the Roman soldiers dismantling it systematically to search for gold and treasure. They didn't know what was maybe hidden in the temple, and so they were going to plunder that, along with killing thousands upon thousands of Jews. And so the siege, famously brutal. The historian Flavius Josephus noted this, and this is what he noted. Now, was he being exaggeratory? I don't know. He seems pretty legit if you read his other stuff. But he estimated that 1.1 million Jews died in 70 AD. That's a lot of death then. Like, it's a lot of death at all, but like, you got to think, That ain't death with missiles and rockets and a nuclear stuff. That is hand-to-hand killing millions, women, children. So you can imagine, just think about this, the preterist view, thinking back, how horrific would that have been? Especially if he's talking to the disciples. So we also have from hunger, disease, estimates of 40 to 100,000 more dead just from that, trying to flee, get away. And so the city was leveled to the ground with few structures left standing. Many Jews were enslaved, sold, or even executed after they had been taken, captured, and then the marking of the beginning of a significant long-term displacement of the Jewish population. So anyways, all of that takes place, but I just want to paint the picture, y'all. This was never discussed much in any type of schooling or training over the years, 70 AD. It just was like, okay, yeah, it's not in the Bible, but it is a super crucial time because at the point of the destruction of the temple, the Judaic age kind of comes to an end with sacrifices. Because after Jesus resurrected, y'all, for the next, Jesus dies, we'll just call it 33 AD. We'll just call it that for argument's sake. It's going to be a little bit before or after. But for argument's sake, 33 AD, so we have 33, 43, 53, 63. We have 40 years later, we have what? The temple being destroyed. So 40 years after Jesus' death, burial, resurrection, and ascension, they're still meeting in the temple making sacrifices. Like that system is still in place. Now the disciples, they're all preaching what? Christ is risen. Jesus is Lord. He is the final sacrifice. Don't turn to goats and bulls and stuff. Look to Christ, the final sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice. You need nothing else. You don't even need the temple anymore. You are the temple. What do you mean with the temple? You receive Christ. You receive the Spirit. You're now the temple of the living God. So we're not worshiping in a specific place or location. You can worship the Lord where? Anywhere. You can talk to God where? Anywhere. Do I need to go make a sacrifice for sin? No. You go straight to the Lord. And if you're in Christ, you're forgiven. So the whole point of referencing this is just to say this was a huge deal 40 years after Jesus had ascended. Like it's just a humongous deal because of what it crushed and kind of displaced the Jews as well. Now, seemingly, that is all God's plan and articulation to ultimately what? Shoot the gospel out over all the world. There's not a central place to come and bring anything. You must what? Go, do, spread. So, kind of the defense for this view, or the main defenses would be the language of this generation, which we talked about in Matthew 23, Matthew 23, verse 36 says this, truly I say to you, all these things will come what? Upon this generation. Now, it is important, to know, at least when you talk about this generation, that almost every time Jesus uses that phrase, or I think every time he uses that phrase, it is a reference to those who he is speaking to at that moment. So that's important to note that too. There again, Jesus is using, I will say this, he is using kind of apocalyptic Old Testament language, which we'll talk about in just a second. He is using some of that language as well throughout the text. Some of the imagery that he's using is used throughout the text. So Matthew 23, 36. So that's a huge deal, this generation, right? Now, if he doesn't mention that, if he just says, and these things will come upon the church, if he just kind of flippantly says that, but there again, he's already used ecclesia, the Greek word for church. He's already used that numerous times. He could have just said, hey, and all these things will come upon the church. You need to prepare the church for all these signs and things to see. He could have just said that, but he doesn't say that. Now, I don't know necessarily the reason in that, but other than like he's talking to them, and it's applicable for them to hear that and to know that. So also too, this generation, and then the phrase, the Great Tribulation. Now, how many of us, again, have always heard Great Tribulation as what? End times tribulation. You just always hear it that way. It's always preached that way. Not always, but if you're in a place that lands on that, you have the Great Tribulation. Also, too, we have the phrase, the abomination of desolation. And Jesus even references this. He says where? In what book? The Old Testament book of Daniel. He references that in there. He says, and Daniel said, he even says that in verse Matthew 24. Matthew 24. Well, and as well as on this generation, he actually says that again. He actually says that again in verse 34. So Matthew 23:36, as well as Matthew 24:34. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. So he says it in regards to the Pharisees in Jerusalem, and then he says it in regards to the disciples after he finishes giving the discourse about the temple. So great tribulation, abomination of desolation. So these are two other things that are really interesting. So the abomination of desolation, what do we always think of that of? End times, Antichrist. We always think about it as some future event. Go to Luke 21. Go to Luke 21. Luke 21. I probably have it in the notes. It'll be in the notes, actually. Luke 21. So the Great Tribulation, reference to the Roman siege. That's a reference. They would say that's a reference to the Roman siege, Great Tribulation, because he's speaking to who? The disciples, who in their lifetime this will occur. And then we have the phrase abomination of desolation is a reference to the Roman desecration of the city, the temple, and the people. We've always thought about it in terms of future stuff. So Luke 21, I want you just to listen to this. But when you see, verse 20, but when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, which is exactly what happened in AD 70, then know that its desolation has come. It's the same phrase that he uses in Matthew's gospel. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let those who are inside the city depart, and let not those who are out in the country enter it. For these are the days of vengeance to fulfill all that is written. Now, I just want to kind of note this too. I'm just kind of playing both sides of it just as we're thinking through it. Why in the world, if this is talking about the very end, would he be talking about the city, staying outside the city, coming in the city, and then he even mentions a specific place. He says, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. That's an interesting statement. Like he's using specific places and time. If it's for the end of the world, wouldn't he just say, by the way, if the abomination of desolation is happening, I don't know what running is going to do anyways. If you're thinking about it in terms of Armageddon. Verse 23, alas, for women who are pregnant and for those who are nursing infants in those days, for there will be great distress upon the earth and the wrath against its people. It's important to note that when any time you see the word earth or the whole world, to their understanding that is the known location where they're at. When he says, go into the world, yes, it's a charge for the globe, but it's also, that phrase is understood as what they would have understood as the known world at the time. There's no way the disciples, given the charge of Matthew 28, can come to the Americas. They have no way to get there. They don't even have a framework for the United States, which is, future. So, verse 24, they will fall by the edge of the sword. They will fall by the edge of the sword and be led captive among all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So I just make that note. It's an interesting note. Then in Luke 21, he references the armies surrounding the city of Jerusalem as what? The desolation. That is referenced in Daniel chapter 9. Let's go to Daniel chapter 9 because Jesus references Daniel. Let's go to Daniel 9. Daniel 9, 26 through 27 says this, and after 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing, and the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Destroy the city and the sanctuary. What is that? Okay, so if we harmonize Luke 21, Matthew 24, what does that sound like? The city, Jerusalem, the sanctuary, the temple. It sounds like Daniel might be, and I'm just kind of arguing for this point, like just not that I land there necessarily, but I'm just arguing from this view that maybe Daniel's not talking about something future from us. Maybe it was future from him and future from the Messiah, but before us. It shall come with the flood, and to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed. Desolations. So that's the same phrase for the abomination of desolation. So, interesting enough, is Luke 21 and Matthew 24, are they both referencing back to Daniel 9 in regards to the destruction of the temple? So, verse 27, and he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of a week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abomination shall come one who makes desolate until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. So, very interesting. So, now, I wanted just to point this out too, because I did think it was kind of interesting. People say, well, if you count up all the weeks in Daniel, we have this 7-year, which is often referred to what? Is this future 7-year tribulation. If you're a premillennial dispensationalist, you will land on a secret rapture and then 7 years where the Antichrist comes about. Now, it's interesting that the Jewish-Roman war that was before 70 AD and lasted after 70 AD, roughly 66 to 73, 74 AD, it is noted by historians that that war lasted about 7 years. So, not saying that you should land there, I'm just saying the numbers add up that you could reference that what Daniel 9 and what Jesus in Matthew 24, Luke 21, and Mark 13 could be all references to the future Jewish-Roman war. And that would, and really when you think about it, it makes a lot of logical sense, since for them to see the temple leveled in 70 AD would have been an absolute sign that what? The sacrificial systems are done. Choose Christ, choose self. So anyways, I do think there's a strong case to be made in this. Now, and you may say, well, Will, he talks about the Son of Man, he talks about the stars falling. That seemed to not have happened at 70 AD. Josephus doesn't say that the sky darkened and that skies were falling. He didn't mention cosmic signs in his notes of that too. But let's look at both Isaiah 13 and Ezekiel 32. When you look at these two texts, and I do not have them, are they in y'all's notes? Isaiah 13 is in your notes? Okay. What verses do I have through there? It's not. Okay. I didn't think it was, but I thought I was going to add it. That's what happens when you get 40, you start forgetting things. I know most of you are either under or over 40. But yeah, 40 you start forgetting stuff. Some of you are like, well, just wait. Just wait till you get older. So Isaiah 13, I just want to read a little bit of this. This is the judgment of Babylon. So they have come and they have overtaken the Jews, and so they will get vengeance from the Lord through the Medes, M-E-D-E-S. He is going to use the Medes to get judgment and to take out the Babylonian Empire, right? God's always going to bring justice about. He may use a nation for justice against his people, but then what will he do? He will always crush that enemy, and he will always elevate his people at some point. That's a theme throughout the Bible. I want you to listen to some of the language that Isaiah uses prophetically to talk about the destruction of Babylon. It says this, the oracle concerning Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amoz saw. On a bare hill, raise a signal, cry aloud to them, wave the hand for them to enter the gates of the nobles. I myself have commanded my consecrated ones, and have summoned my mighty men to execute my anger, my proudly exulting ones. The sound of a tumult is in on the mountains, of a great multitude, the sound of an uproar of kingdoms, of nations gathering together. The Lord of hosts is mustering a host for battle. They come from a distant land, from the end of the heavens. You see that language? From the end of the heavens. We don't read that and go, did they come out of the sky? Did God just call them out of the sky, these warriors, to come down and destroy them? And the Lord and the weapons of his indignation to destroy the whole land. Wail, for the day of the Lord is near. I want you to hear that. What does it say? The day of the Lord. Now, what do we always think of the day of the Lord as in the New Testament? Second coming. But he's saying right now, the day of the Lord. Babylon being taken and destroyed, the day of the Lord. It doesn't always mean the second coming in the Old Testament. It can mean the day of the Lord, the judgment of God. As destruction from the Almighty, it will come. Therefore, all hands will be feeble, and every human heart will melt. Do they actually physically melt? Are hearts melting? No, just it's apocalyptic literature. It's language. It's prophetic. They will be dismayed. Pangs and agony will seize them. They will be in anguish like a woman in labor. They will look aghast at one another. Their faces will be aflame. Behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel, with wrath and fierce anger, to make the land a desolation. That is all symbolic of them being destroyed and taken out. And to destroy its sinners from it. For the stars of the heavens and their constellations will not give their light. Now, there's no reference there that stars just started to cut out or fall out of the sky. We can't see them. The sun will be dark at its rising, and the moon will not shed its light. And then he goes on and on and on. You can finish reading the text if you like. So it just keeps going on and on. But the point is this. We have sun darkening. The moon ain't giving light. Stars aren't lighting up. The day of the Lord is coming. All of these things are all apocalyptic, prophetic language to make a point that something destructive and chaotic is going to happen. So I'm saying that because a lot of the language used in the first 35 verses in Matthew 24 are very parallel to what we see in this text. And you can read Ezekiel 32 tonight. That's your homework. Read Ezekiel 32, and you can see this will be the fall of Pharaoh in Egypt, the destruction of Egypt. Now, not Egypt from not the people of God coming out, but later on. But all of that language is designed to paint a picture of the wrath of the Lord is coming on the enemy of his people. So when Jesus references all of this stuff in Matthew 24, it seems that he's pulling from Old Testament scripture to make a point about this destruction of the temple and the Judaic age. That's really the whole argument of the preterist view. And it would also be an argument kind of in the symbolic view that God is going to continue to kind of do this stuff and it will cycle throughout history. Or the historicist view that this is happening throughout history and yet happened here as well, almost to kind of kick it off, that it would just kind of continue. So, all right, so there we go. There's kind of a defense for it as far as that goes. Now, y'all, let me tell you something. If you want to hear some arguments, type in what does Matthew 24 mean online, because you will get a ton of different viewpoints that come in. So I'm just saying, I want you guys to know where the view comes from right here, which means there's some challenges that take place with this as well, and then we'll close up. A few of the challenges would be the cosmic signs being seen symbolically. Other people go, well, that's just really hard to understand, Will. He talks about the sun and the moon. He talks about stars. That's got to be a future event. Well, if you don't see Old Testament references to a people that would have understood Old Testament scriptures, and you go, well, he was talking about something completely different. And they use the idea of this generation, people that argued this against it, they go, well, this generation, he's talking about all of the people of the earth, like the whole generation of the church. He's not just talking to Peter, James, John, and Andrew. He's not just talking to them. He's talking about all the stuff. And they would have understood that. Okay, maybe. I mean, I'm not here to like fight over that. I'm just saying these are kind of the challenges that people say, well, this generation isn't just talking about them. He's not talking about their lifetime. He's talking about the generation of all the people of the future church until he returns. Maybe. Maybe. It doesn't seem consistent with the grammar, but maybe. And then we have the coming of the Son of Man as symbolic here specifically. So when Jesus in Matthew 24, he says, Matthew 24, the section of verse 36. I'm sorry. We're going to go up some. Verse 29. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. Da, 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 da. Verse 30, then will appear in the heaven the sign of the Son of Man. So people say, well, the Son of Man, the sign of the Son of Man is the second coming, right? The Son of Man, that's the sign. And then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory, which is exactly the language that is used in Ezekiel 32. That the Lord coming on a cloud is not literal coming, like physically coming down, but rather His wrath and His justice is coming. So people read that and go, no, 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 no. He's coming on the cloud. Revelation talks about Him coming back on a horse, robe, and a sword out of His mouth. This is the same thing. There again, could be. I'm not here to debate the point, but these are just some of the challenges that people would bring against this specific view. Now, I will say this. As we close up, thank you guys for listening and participating. I will say this, that it is sometimes very difficult for us in the West to not see every single thing written in the Bible that sounds kind of future, for it not to be us thinking in terms of future to who? Us. It's very difficult not to find yourself that way, and a lot of that is because the teaching in the States for the last 150 or 200 years has very much inclined the U.S. to think about the end times really in direct correlation to the generation they were preaching to, almost always. So anything that's said in the Gospels about future stuff, well, you need to be looking for that, and you need to be looking for that. And I think we have to remember, there again, I'm not saying I agree totally with this point, I'm just saying, we have to remember that the Bible was not written directly to us, but it is absolutely for us. So I think we just have to find an understanding of, and you'll always have this debate till the Lord returns. You'll always have the debate because people will not want to see that symbolically or not want to see it as already having occurred, because it almost feels like they have been left out of something very cool at the end. And I'm going, it's totally fine, because you have a job and instructions to do that have been given to you throughout the New Testament. We need to be faithful and diligent with that and not probably worry about all of the other little things that you're trying to figure out that, to be honest, have just been debated for the last 1,800 years. So if I had one point of advice on this, if you're trying to figure out what stance to take the stance of an obedient disciple that shares the gospel, that lives faithfully, and your life points other people to Jesus. So thank you for tonight, guys, hanging out with us, and we'll cover the other views in the next week and so. And thank y'all for being here. We love you. Jesus loves you. And hopefully we'll see you Sunday at 10 a.m.